All right, this is the Zoom L-12, and you're actually hearing my voice coming through the L-12, recorded onto the SD card, and then synced with the camera audio. So let's go from top to bottom and then over to the side, starting off with these mic and line combo inputs. You can see I have a mic going into the preamp here on channel 1, which you are hearing, and I have a line input going into channel 2. And then we have 8 total preamps. You can put in microphones. They all provide phantom power if you're using condenser microphones. In this case, I'm using a Sennheiser E835 dynamic mic, so I don't need phantom power. And the first 2 channels have high Z input, so if you're using guitars, it'll power that. And the other preamps up here, the other channels, have pads on them. So actually, if you're going line in, you'd probably have better success on channel 3 through 8 because it has an additional pad on it. So let's talk a little bit about that. So on the mic preamp, you can see it goes from plus 16 dB to plus 60 dB. Over here, when you get into 3 through 8, the line level is minus 10 dB is where it starts, and it goes up to plus 34. And you have this pad. So again, line level better suited for these channels up here. Moving down the channel strip, you can see we have one knob compression, and I have this on. It works really well for limiting your audio. In this case, I do spoken word, podcasting, and live streaming, and video in this case. And this works great for limiting your audio. Now, it will also have some gain that it applies to it. So as you bring the compressor up, you want to compensate with your gain to come back down to get the level that you actually want to get. So in this case, normally without the compressor, I'll turn this off, I would run the preamp at about 75%, and you can hear that's pretty clean. And I'm not quite getting the levels I want exactly through this microphone, so I'd have to come up to more like about 80%, so I'm around that minus 18 mark. For digital, that's going to be good for me. And you can hear that that is clean as well. But as you bring the compressor up, you can hear that it increases the gain as well because it applies its own gain. And so as I bring this up to about 70% on the compression, I'm going to back off the preamp back to about 50, 60 in this case, almost going to go up to 75. This mic needing a little bit more gain where I have it positioned a couple inches away from my mouth. And I'm looking again, in my case, about this minus 18 is going to work for me. And you can see we're getting a signal and it's not clipping. So that is good audio right there where I want to be. And this does a good job in cases where you get really loud. Hey, hey! And that protects it, at least on the USB out if you're going in via audio interface and onto the SD card recording the separate channels. So I do like using the compressor, even though you are baking that in to your file. If you didn't want to put any compression on, then again, turn that off and go with your preamp. And then I assume you know you're not going to get loud enough to peak the audio. Next in line is this selection knob, and this will control what channel strip you are changing settings such as EQ. So this blue strip of selectors is controlled by this blue section. So on this channel here, I would select it and then I could do my EQ. And I like that these selections, it's all digital. These are granular. It fades into the next one. So it's not just one click and it changes it. It takes a couple clicks, a couple turns before it actually changes to the next setting. So that's really nice. Next, you have your record activation switch here. And this is obviously to arm the channel for recording or playback. But here you can see these are red, and you press each channel that you want to record. Since I'm currently recording, I can't activate new channels. And then we have mute. And mute is an interesting one, and one of the downfalls, maybe, of this, at least for me. These mutes don't do as much as I wish they would. And then you have the audio meter with the fader, which gets pretty interesting. I really like the resolution on the audio meter. It's 12 LEDs deep, so you can really tell where your audio is at. So that's a big key for me. And you can see we have plus 10 on this side down to infinity. And then on this side, we have 0 down to minus 48. So what the left side is showing you is actually the level of your mix. And what you're seeing right now are the brighter LEDs. Watch as I hit the mute button, they get dimmer. So the brighter LEDs are the mix level. And when I click that to mute, you can see that the dimmer LEDs are showing me my record levels on my individual tracks and what's going out the USB. So when I mute, I'm not seeing any bright LEDs because I'm muted. Therefore, nothing's coming into the main mix. And when I click that off, now you're seeing the mix level in the bright green, and then you can see that that is translating over to our master mix. And important to note, if you want to record the master mix, you also need to select it here in the record section, just like here. Now you'll notice over here, we'll skip over to this section because for podcasters, this is really cool. And musicians as well, anyone who's monitoring audio, you give 5 different headphone outputs, A through E. What this allows you to do is you could create up to 5 different mix minuses. So if you're recording people or you're doing stuff online, you can bring people into the mixer, the L-12, and send back the signal minus their voice so they don't get a feedback loop. So lots of control for several mix minuses. But you notice, like a traditional mixer, we don't have any auxiliary sends. So how does that work? So in this case, we'll pretend that the person on the computer is coming into this line in on channel 2. So this is their channel and they're coming in to here. And we want to send back my microphone on channel 1 without them getting themselves back. So I mentioned that the mute doesn't work, so you don't just mute their channel. On this side of the meter, you can see we have the mix, the fader indicators. It's going from plus 10 down to infinity. And on this side, we have 0 to minus 48, and that's the preamp. So you would take their channel and you would come all the way down to infinity. So that audio is no longer coming through the master. So you can see in this example, if I come down to infinity on this fader, we're no longer sending any audio to the master, which is what I'm actually hearing, and actually what the channel B is getting. So you would take their channel and set it to infinity, and then you would input this channel, one of these channels, as your input to your computer. So if you know how to do a mix minus, you should understand that. Otherwise, you can see my video about setting up a mix minus, and effectively one of these outputs will act like your auxiliary send. And how you go about choosing these outputs and different mixes for them, this is where a digital mixer gets a little confusing. You have this routing section here, A, B, C, D, E. You have 5 different setups, one for each of these outputs that controls all of these inputs separately. So in the case of using this B as your auxiliary send for your mix minus, you would go to B. This is channel 2. Their fader would come all the way down. My fader would be up to wherever you want it set so that they could actually hear it in the mix. But on this channel, they're not getting anything. So you can output B to the computer without them hearing themselves. And then any other channels you want to send to them, you bring those up on the fader. Now you'll notice, if we go back to A, you'll see that it gives you an indicator right up here where this fader is. If I changed it, if I went to B and I changed this fader down to that and then went back to A, the level is still at where I had it set at 0. In order to get that to change when I go back to A, if I want to change that level, you actually have to reset it by just going to where it was, and you can watch it turn off. There it goes. Now I can use this fader control again on A. So this is where it gets a little confusing. Basically, when you go to all of these, your settings stay the same, and if you want to change them, you just have to reset it. Basically going past the point where it was, it turns it off, letting you know that you're ready to reset a new level. So that is confusing, but that is how you control the different settings for the different setups you're going to use for your headphone routing. All right, moving over to these two channel strips, you can see you have two stereo inputs if that's something you need, but you also have a USB return. So this one's active. It's bringing back any audio from the computer into this channel, and I can control the level with these faders here. But if you want to bring audio from your computer into the mix, you can just simply activate your USB and set your level. So that's a really nice option. Also, a little bit back to these different setups here. If you want to save a setup, you have a whole bunch of options here to create a scene. So you can set it up, all your settings the way you want, and then you can just save it here in a preset so you can easily bring these back up anytime you want. If all the knobs get changed, don't have to worry about that. Bring up your scene recall and you'll be back to where you were. So that's really handy. All of these effects are some type of reverb, and I don't want any reverb on my spoken word audio. And if I did, I would do that in post-production. But if that's something you're into, you have several different effects and a lot of control over those. Again, back to the monitor out section, all these headphones, they each have their own preamps. So what's really nice is if everyone is monitoring their audio separately, they have their own level control. They can also monitor the master mix, so the entire mix, or they can monitor the custom mix that you have set up. This is something that basically takes out typically a headphone amplifier, which would add multiple preamps to one headphone output. Now you have that all built in to this mixer. And this mixer does one of the most amazing things that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, and which I mentioned, and that's it outputs via the USB while also recording to the SD card. Typically for microphones, you're going to have these first 8 tracks recorded separately to the SD card or out the USB at the same time. That is huge. You don't have to pick between whether you want to record on the SD card or use it as an audio interface. You can do both, which acts as not only a backup, but if you want to live stream and record on the L-12, you could do that. So that to me is a huge, huge advantage to this mixer. A little quirky here on the record, you have to hit record and then play before it starts recording. I wish I could also see the levels of the individual tracks. If we could switch to that, other Zoom devices like the F8, you could see all the individual levels. You can't hear, but make sure that clock is moving so that you are recording any of the channels that you've armed to record. And again, don't forget to hit play, but always check that numbers are moving on any recorder that you're using. So outside of the mute buttons, not really doing much for you except going to the master. That's unfortunate, but it's not a deal breaker. The preamps are good. Once you get past 75%, you'll probably introduce a little bit of noise, but you can see I'm pushing this microphone at 75%, and it sounded fantastic. And the USB out and the individual tracks of the SD card being pre-fader, that could be good or bad for you. It's fine for me. I can work around it. What's nice is once you set this, you're not really going to mess up your recording. And if you need to change your levels, you can affect that via the gain.